Good afternoon. My name is Cedric Harville, and I am a doctoral student at the University of Florida. Today's webinar um, is regards getting involved in organizations at the local and national level, specifically with the American Public Health Association. I am the chair-elect for the PHEHP Student Engagement Work Group, which stands for the Public Health Education and Health Promotion Student Engagement Work Group. This is our very first webinar, and we hope this is very informative. And we hope that this will be the start of a series of webinars over the course of the next few years. So here's our guest speaker, Mrs. Joanna Hinman, who is the Associate Director of Education for the Department of Surgery in the School of Medicine at Emory University. Ms. Hinman has 16 years of experience in public health education, health communication, program planning, and program management. She is a graduate of the Emory's Rollins School of Public Health and a Master Certified Health Education Specialist. Ms. Hinman began her career for the CDC and then with Arthritis Foundation National Office. She spent 10 years at the Rollins School of Public Health working in tobacco control and environmental health before joining the Emory Prevention Research Center, where she was senior lead staff person. At the Emory Prevention Research Center, Joanna oversaw center administration, managed supplemental funding applications, led communication and dissemination efforts, supervised project staff, and coordinated partnership activities across a range of sectors. In 2012, she joined the Department of Surgery as the first Associate Director of Education, where she oversees programs and initiatives for education and training of medical students, surgery residents, and continuing education for fellows and faculty members. Joanna is an active member of the Georgia Public Health Association and the American Public Health Association, as well as the Association for Surgical Education. She is a past chair of the American Public Health Association's Public Health Education and Health Promotion section, a past secretary for the Georgia Public Health Association, past chair of the Georgia Public Health Association Health Education and Health Promotion, and a past president of the Rollins School of Public Health Alumni Association. From September 2007 until April 2013, she served as the Georgia Public Health Association's affiliate representative to the American Public Health Association Governing Council and is now president-elect for the Georgia Public Health Association. Ms. Joanna Hinman also teaches in the Executive MPH program at the Rollins School of Public Health and is a member of the American Public Health Association Awards Committee. Without further ado, I'd like to present our guest speaker for today, Ms. Joanna Hinman.
Hi, thanks very much, Cedric, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I think this is a great opportunity for, I'm really pleased to see the Student Engagement Work Group taking such an active role in the Public Health Education Health Promotion section for APHA. What I'm going to talk about today is mostly from my own experience and some close colleagues, but I think the principles and many of the examples I'm going to give you'll find to be common across a lot of leaders in professional organizations, whether they be the American Public Health Association or other professional organizations. And I'll talk a little bit about why that kind of engagement is important. So we could move on to the next slide. So I'm really framing this as a little bit of talking about professional development in the context of that being personal preparedness for leaders, that sort of preparedness analogy. I'll go ahead and make excuses for my rather plain slides with plain clip art, but I think we'd rather focus on examples and content anyway. So we can move on to the next slide. Some of you may be familiar with the APHA Get Ready for Flu campaigns from year to year, and in the past couple of years they've run contests where members can send in pictures of their pets to become part of the Get Ready preparedness calendars. Being a cat person myself, that's the example that I'm going to look to here. But one of the And these, of course, are fairly silly, but at the same time, there are important messages behind them. And this one being, you know, if you're prepared, in advance, then you can be relaxed and not worry so much. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit, is how that kind of preparedness relates to professional development and personal preparedness. Next slide. If we could have the next slide. Thanks. When we think about preparedness and the idea of getting ready in the context of disaster preparedness, we're really talking about, we want our situation to be better safe than sorry. We're going to hope for the best, but we're expecting the worst and preparing for the worst. In personal preparedness and professional development, you're really talking about preparing for the best. You want to become the skilled professional who's a leader in your field, whatever field that is. And in public health, there are so many different disciplines within that there are a lot of opportunities to take leadership roles, even if it's not immediately obvious to you exactly where your role might be. Next slide. One of the things we talk about in preparedness is whether or not you're really ready for an emergency. Do you have a kit ready in the context of natural disasters or medical disasters? We talk about having food, water, the radio for communication, that kind of thing, your important documents ready, and creating a family communication plan and that evacuation plan. The key is having a plan, knowing where you're supposed to go next and knowing who you're going to contact in case of an emergency, and a way of being informed, keeping track of what's going on. Next slide. If we think about leadership and professional development, we need to apply some of those same principles. You still need to have a kit. The kit is different. It's not backup cans of SpaghettiOs. It's your skills, your knowledge, your experience, and your network is a key part of that kit. You want to make sure that you have up-to-date business cards, that you have an up-to-date resume. You never know when there might be an opportunity to present yourself to somebody, and you want to be ready. We can think about that communication and evacuation plan as being, where are the places that I can communicate with other people, that I can network with other people. Those might be professional conferences like the upcoming American Public Health Association conference next month in New Orleans. It might be through webinars like this on Google Hangouts, or some other kind of opportunity where people are going to gather. You want to think about, who are your first responders? Who are the people you can call on for advice and mentoring, especially if you're presented with maybe a difficult choice or an opportunity that you weren't expecting? Do you have people that you can call on and say, I need some help, can you help talk me through how I might look at these options? And you want to think a little bit too about sheltering in place. What's the most basic job you could do well for a while if you had to? We all are going to be in the workforce for a long, long time, and the days of signing up with one company and staying with them for 40 years and then retiring with a gold watch are pretty much gone. And you know that you're likely to move around quite a bit during your career. Not every one of those jobs is maybe going to be the perfect job, but what are the things that you know you can do and be reasonably satisfied and do a reasonably good job at while you look for that next opportunity? And I think that's a piece of advice that I didn't receive early in my career, but have come to realize is an important one. It's important to know what you can do well at a basic level to keep yourself afloat, keep your skills up, even while you're looking for your next great opportunity. It's also important that you stay informed. You want to keep up with other people doing work in your field. What's the state of your science? If you're interested in a particular content area, if you're particularly interested in influenza, you want to make sure that you know what's the latest science, what are the latest trends in different virus strains that are coming out, what are the patterns, the latest outbreaks and epidemics, what's happening in your particular field, who are the people who seem to be publishing a lot, speaking a lot on this topic, and who's doing something new and interesting. So that's your being informed component, is making sure that you're staying current with your knowledge. Whatever you gained in your training and your formal education is great, and that's always going to be the base. But science changes very quickly. We have new developments all the time, and it's important to stay current. Next slide. Scattered throughout these slides are going to be a number of quotes from current and past leaders within the American Public Health Association as part of a big project of doing a series. A colleague of mine did a big series of interviews with a number of APHA leaders to really find out what was their perspective on leadership and how did they get into leadership roles. I'm not going to read every one of these quotes, but you can see highlighted in green where there are some common themes that are going to come up every time. Dr. Linda DeGudas is a recent past president of APHA, and I love that her opening line here is, if you're wondering whether or not you should get involved, go for it. Figure out what you're interested in doing and just step up. Don't be afraid of failing. Don't be afraid of not winning an election. In a lot of organizations, the highest level leadership posts are elected, and there may be some aspect of campaigning. Particularly within APHA, the campaign for president-elect is a little bit like a campaign for running for mayor. It's quite political, and I think for a lot of people that may be too intimidating, but there are a lot of ways you can get involved if you don't necessarily get that leadership post the first time around. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit personally about my own experience. And when I started out, my first APHA conference was New York City in 1996. So the skyline looked, unfortunately, a little bit different then than it looks now. There have been a lot of changes since 1996. But the first lesson I learned, if we could have the next slide, is APHA is a really intimidating kind of organization once you start getting into it. And figuring out where to start to get involved in APHA can be a bit of a challenge. Looking on a slightly less humorous note, I don't really think APHA is full of zombies, but that is sort of a good, scary picture to start with. If you want to look at a more technical aspect to show how large and complex APHA is, you can go to the next slide and look at this map that some leaders within APHA started to develop to help people figure out if we want to get general membership of the association involved and start to really cultivate our leadership, how do people get involved? How does somebody get to be a member of APHA's executive board, for example? How do we find the people who are going to be the next president of APHA or the next chair of the executive board? How do we find the people who are going to be leading the major boards and committees and the major components of the organization? So a number of people worked on developing a leadership map, and this is still available on APHA's website. And I think it's not currently being further developed right now, but I think it's a good indicator of the number of different ways that you can get engaged in something like APHA. If APHA isn't your first choice organization, I would bet that the organizational maps for a lot of large professional organizations look pretty similar. They're going to be broken down into multiple component parts, and you can see within APHA there are sort of two major categories of those parts. There are the sections, which are based around different public health disciplines, such as public health education and health promotion, epidemiology. Some are based around content areas like HIV, AIDS, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. So there are those sections that bring people together around their professional interests. Then there are also the affiliates, which are by state or by region, and those are based on geography. So the Georgia Public Health Association, which I'll talk about a little bit too, is my own affiliate. And that's based on the fact that I'm a public health person living and working in Georgia. But our membership is diverse. It encompasses people from across all the disciplines of public health. So we start with our members, then we break into these different components, and then as you move up in the leadership of those organizations, there are different stages of leadership for each of those. And I'll come back to this map a couple of times, but we could move on to the next slide and say the first place that you start in your own development or in preparedness of any kind is locally. I first went to APHA as an MPH student. My dad was involved in APHA, And he encouraged me to go, and one of my mentors, Dr. Kathy Miner from the School of Public Health at Emory, told me to go. They basically said, if you want to get involved in public health and you want to meet other people who are in public health and find a good job in public health, you got to go to the American Public Health Association conference and you'll meet all of these people. I was 26, just starting a master's degree program in public health, and I didn't really have any idea what to expect out of APHA. The zombie picture shows I was a little overwhelmed that first time around. In 1997, the next year, I joined the Georgia affiliate of APHA, GPHA. By the next year, I had become my section secretary in that association. That's not because I mounted a very vigorous campaign to do that. It's because I volunteered and other people pushed me to volunteer to do that. And that's the way a lot of leadership opportunities come about. But for the last 16 years, I've had a leadership position in at least one of these organizations that entire time. And all of that comes about from starting with showing up the first time, showing up in 1996 to APHA, in 1997 to GPHA, and going and meeting some people. Next slide. So I'll start by talking just a little bit about getting involved in the affiliate, at the affiliate level. That felt a little more manageable to me. APHA has somewhere between 22 and 25,000 members. GPHA has about 1,300. So right there, we're talking about a more manageable number of people and a more manageable size conference. I felt like I could really meet a lot of people and get to know them a little bit better in the context of the Georgia Public Health Association. So here I was attending my first state Public Health Association meeting, and I went to my individual association. GPHA is modeled very much the way APHA is, so we have a health education and health promotion section also, and I went to the meeting and met some of the people, and the next year when we were looking around the room for volunteers to get involved in leadership positions, they said, we're going to need a new secretary. Is anybody interested? And Kathy Miner again sort of poked me in the back and said, you know, hey, it's your turn. It's time for you to get involved. And that's really where it started. You can go to the next slide. I bring up that section piece because, from there, I was jumping ahead in my own slides, my apology. That was my first real position within GPHA. I'm currently the president-elect of the state association, and that's been 15 years in the making, but it's been a continuous process and not one that required me to campaign actively, but it did require me to be involved and be engaged and continue showing up. At the national level within APHA, I started out getting involved again in my section in public health education and health promotion, working on the program committee. I figured I could help out with managing abstract reviews and things like that. And that led into a whole series of other positions up to section chair. By becoming one of the chairs, becoming a section chair of one of the largest sections in APHA, I got to meet the national level association and got invited by the APHA executive director to be on the APHA awards committee. So there are places where you think you're starting out by volunteering at something small, but it snowballs. Leadership begets leadership is what one of my colleagues often says, but I really think of it as volunteering yourself or being volunteered by somebody else often begets leadership on your behalf. So I would say step up, volunteer, get involved. But remember, it's likely to lead to some other things. We can go to the next slide. And as I mentioned, with any organization of any size, you want to find the component that's the most comfortable for you. And that might be a smaller segment to start with. Within APHA, there are those state and regional affiliates. That's kind of where I started getting involved with GPHA and then paralleling that with some involvement at APHA. My APHA leadership had started with my section, Public Health Education and Health Promotion. Next slide. in any organization, no matter the size, those individual components are probably the place where the real work is happening and where people really get to meet each other and get to know each other. At APHA, during the annual meeting, every section has opportunities to schedule so that you can meet together with other people of your own discipline or your own particular content area of interest. I should warn you, those section meetings can be very early in the morning. Often they're at 6:30 in the morning, or they might be quite 8 or 8:30. Get up and go anyway. All of those section business meetings are open. You are invited. I think many of us didn't realize that at first. I always thought, gosh, you know, the section business meeting must only be for people who have elected office in the section, but that's not true. You can just go and show up, and then what happens is you're meeting other people in that section and you're starting to do some networking. Having bagels together or getting a cup of coffee together, but that's the networking that gets started, and it's much easier to do that in that kind of, and just sit next to somebody and talk about what the section is doing, and then before you know it, you have an opportunity to volunteer. Somebody will say, we need more people for the committee, we need some people to help us review abstracts for the program, we need people to do any number of things, and those people we need, the people who volunteer, those are our leaders here, and you become a leader. People get to know you, you build your network that way, and then you have that opportunity to go on and choose how you really want to get involved. Next slide. I'm not going to walk through bullets because that would be really dull to go through my whole resume. The only thing I want to point out is that in both APHA and GPHA, there's a progression from starting at that section level, doing some small things that may feel, they don't feel like leadership. Maybe reviewing poster session abstracts doesn't feel like leadership, but there are a lot of members of your section who aren't even doing that. So by stepping forward and volunteering to do that, you're showing leadership, you're showing interest, engagement. To me, when I look at my resume and I see all of these different bullet points, I think, wow, I really can't stop myself from volunteering. But that's a good thing. The other thing that strikes me about it is I never intended when I volunteered to run for section secretariat at the state that I was also going to follow all of these other paths. I was just thinking about the next year and trying to be a good organized section secretary. But it led into a lot of other things. Next slide. And if you look a little more chronologically, the real map of how this happened was getting involved for several years in a row in a deep way in my affiliate section, and then moving up into some more involvement and engagement with APHA. And there have been many years where I've held either elected or appointed positions in both associations at the same time. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that except your own sense of how much you can handle doing at one time. And it's a great way to stay connected. I feel like the Georgia Public Health Association is what keeps me grounded in where I live. And even though the work that I'm doing isn't traditional public health at the state or local level, I live and work in Georgia, and I'm a public health person. Therefore, the Georgia Public Health Association is my professional identity. My job now isn't traditional public health education and health promotion, but that section has given me a home at the national level with APHA. And so both of those come together. Next slide. So when we go back to this leadership map, all the green stars are different places of getting involved at different places that I've gotten engaged in APHA. It doesn't show out in quite as much detail about the affiliate on that light blue side, but I've had lots of different opportunities and lots of different roles within GPHA to get there, and a number of different roles within APHA. And all along the way, I've had the fantastic privilege and opportunity to work with some absolutely amazing people who are doing amazing work all over the country and all over the world. Next slide. So one of the things that is tricky for those of us in public health is that we don't tend to follow particularly traditional career paths. And this idea of knowing all of the specific routes or the specific paths is a little bit tricky in public health. Next slide. But I think that's fine. Nobody ever grows up as a fourth grader saying, I want to grow up and be in public health, because generally speaking, the public at large doesn't have a good sense of what public health is. And if you talk to seasoned professionals in the field, for the most part, everyone has a different story of how we kind of found our way into public health, or we fell into public health by accident, or I backed into it, I started doing this job, and then I realized that it was a public health job. Leadership is much the same way. Especially, I think, leadership in professional organizations. Most of us didn't start out in the fourth grade saying, I want to grow up to be the chair of the health education section in APHA. But if you look to some of our other APHA leadership, you can see these examples as well. Next slide. I mentioned Dr. Kathy Miner, who is at Rollins School of Public Health at Emory. Kathy's been a mentor to many, many health educators across the country over the years. And the way she described her own path into leadership was that she was mentored into it. Her volunteer work escalated. You start out at some small level doing that little volunteer task, and then it becomes an opportunity to be elected for office, and then moving up the chain. And along the way, as she points out, you develop a national network. And I think most of us think of our networks not only as a professional network, but close friends. And dear colleagues, if you come to the annual meeting of the American Public Health Association, it's like a big reunion. Everybody gets together for part of a week each year, and it may be the only time during the year that we see each other in person. But there's a real close. We all have a passion about public health. Next slide. So if you're preparing for something like APHA or any kind of meeting or opportunity where you have that chance to do some networking, natural introvert or maybe a little bit shy, it might be something that you need to practice a little bit. Putting yourself out there just enough to be able to introduce yourself comfortably to other people. Having an elevator, the idea of the elevator speech is you get on the first floor and maybe you're riding 7 or 10 floors up with somebody and they see your name tag from the American Public Health Association conference and say, oh, what do you do? You want to have a little thing that won't take any longer than that elevator ride. It's not the history of your whole family's story. It's just, I work at the local health department in my community and I'm the community outreach person for our environmental health office, whatever the case might be. You just want to make sure that you can tell somebody articulately who you are and what you do. You always want to be professional and polite. That doesn't mean you have to be overly formal, but you do want to be professional and polite. And if you volunteer to do something, follow through and do it. If you meet somebody at a conference or on the elevator or in the hallway and you want to continue to build a relationship with that person, it's on you to do some of that follow-up. So you meet some leaders at APHA who say, I love to spend time mentoring students, and you think that's somebody I really would like to hear from in the future. Reach out to that person again and follow up. Not in a stalking way, but you know, these are busy professionals, but if you make the effort to be engaged, they will make the effort to be engaged back with you. Next slide. Michael Bird, one of the past presidents of APHA, I think has a great example here that he hadn't done very much. He didn't know very much about APHA or even the New Mexico Public Health Association, but he was really more concerned about how that affiliate hadn't done very much with the American Indian community, and so he joined the affiliate to get them involved, right, to build some of those partnerships. And that's a great way to get involved as well. If you see an opportunity, you see a place where, gee, my state affiliate, my state public health association really should be involved with this community or this group or this issue, get involved in the affiliate and make them involved. Next slide. One of the things that I think is consistent across public health is the closeness of our networks. And part of this, I think, is the personal passion that so many people bring to their work in public health. It's not a profession that pulls people in to make a lot of money or make people famous. It's not something that is going to be easy to explain to your grandmother what you're doing or explain to other people exactly what your job is. So our professional family is very close because we all understand what that's like. What I would say too is that you're likely to cross paths with people over and over again in different places and different agencies. It's no longer the case that somebody will go to CDC and spend their entire career at CDC and never go anywhere else, and that you would do the same thing in a different division. It's much more likely that you'd go to CDC for a while and then maybe you'd be on an interagency professional agreement with another agency, and you'd be crossing paths with people from those divisions and those agencies. So don't burn bridges. If you move on to another place, that's fine. Don't burn the bridges behind you. As you move on to somewhere else, keep in touch with colleagues from your previous position. Keep in touch with people. Let them know where you are and ask where they are, because you're going to run into them again. But again, always do what you say you will do. Take the opportunity to volunteer for something and then make sure that you do what you volunteered to do. Next slide. Pat Mail, another past president of APHA, joined while she was a student. And I think that's a great opportunity, especially now. The student assembly at APHA is so vibrant and so active and is so pushing the association to be a much better resource and a stronger resource for the challenges that we face in public health today. So I really encourage you to do that. Get involved in the student assembly, get involved in APHA, even at the point of being a student, because you're going to have those opportunities to become leaders that much earlier. Pat points out again too, she was asked to be program chair. How hard could that be? It can be very difficult, can be very challenging, but that's where she got started, and it led all the way up to being a president of APHA. And it started back at being a program chair for her section, right? Which I have the bias that she's in the health education and health promotion section, but that's not unique to that section. Next slide. The idea of being prepared is that you don't want to be caught off guard. You don't want a lot of surprises. We don't like surprises in our professional lives, but they are going to come along sometimes. Next slide. There will be times that your organization may have to downsize, or it may change focus and it's no longer the organization you want to be in. That's not a crisis. You have prepared yourself. You have your skills ready. You know what you're good at. You've got networks, but you may have to make some choices. You might have to choose to leave an association or an organization that you've been involved in, but it no longer is a good opportunity for you. You might have to choose to move to a different city to follow the job that you really, really want. Think carefully about where are the places you really want to go. But don't be afraid to think outside the box and take something because it sounds like it's going to be really interesting to you and something that you love. You're not going to be able to do absolutely everything, but you'll have a lot of opportunities to do great things. Next slide. Looking across the different leaders that we talked to in collecting quotes about leadership development and mentoring, there are some commonalities, even though each one of them has come into their leadership positions in different ways. Everybody talks about the critical role of mentors. Some of those are formal, your professors, your bosses. Some of them are discovered, APHA colleagues, for example, or colleagues in another organization who you may just start chit-chatting with at some point, and then you realize that you're really calling on that person a lot to give you some advice and to test out ideas ideas. Your fellow students. I always say to students in the Rollins School of Public Health, make sure to be nice to those people who are assigned to you in a group project. You never know when you're going to be working together again in the future. And you can learn so much from each other. Everyone coming into public health programs now has so much diverse experience already. They're great resources for you. There are so many opportunities to take on new roles too. If you volunteer, that leads to you getting a leadership opportunity. And if you do a good job, if you're a good volunteer, people will ask you to do other things and will offer you other opportunities. Don't be confused, opportunity always means more work, but it also means rewarding work, and that's really what we're all looking for. You want to make sure that you're always open to learning from other people, and occasionally you have to take some risks. But one of the ways that I think many of us continue to feel grounded in what we're doing is by giving back to the profession, going back to APHA or our state affiliate and giving back to those organizations by serving in leadership roles, by recruiting new members, and by encouraging our new members and our student members to stay involved and help us figure out what to do next. The network is always important in this. Wherever you are, all those people that you know, that's your network, and they're always going to be places that you can find sounding boards, you can find out more information about an organization or an opportunity that's coming up. Next slide. I'm including the next slide a little bit with a grain of salt. You may recognize the last name is the same as mine. This is my dad. But in his life, other than just being my dad, he's also very engaged in public health and very engaged in APHA. And one of the things that he points out is the APHA family is a lot like other families. There are occasionally conflicts. There are occasionally difficult members of the family. If you go and sit in at the council of APHA, which is the sort of like the legislature for the association, you will hear people disagreeing passionately about different issues. But at the end of the day, everyone knows that the reason we're disagreeing is we have different perspectives on how to come to the best outcome for public health and the health of the people we're working for. That's why people are so engaged and why. And it also means that at the end of the day, even if we are disagreeing about a particular approach or a particular issue, we're probably all going to walk out of the room together smiling. Next slide. So the basics of this sort of preparedness idea are you got to be ready, you want to be prepared because you don't know exactly when an opportunity is going to come to you. And the starting point might be very small. You might think you're just going to sit in the back of the room at a section business meeting, and then somebody will turn around and say, hey, Cedric, have you gotten involved yet? We really could student reviewers for the abstracts this year. That might seem like a very small thing that you don't even notice, but next year, maybe you'll be chair of the abstract committee. And all of those things add up together to put you on that path to leadership. Next slide. I love Mel Shipp's quote here, I can't remember all of the details, right? My leadership began quite simply, somebody in my section asked me to do something and I said yes. That's the most important thing. When somebody asks you to do something you can do, say yes, get involved. Next slide. As much as I've tried to give you some tips and bullet points, there's not really a formal map here, and your path is going to be your own. It will be different from other people's, but you are at a point where it is your turn to step up. As you finish your training, as you get into new opportunities, then it becomes your turn to take leadership opportunities. Next. I've got one more quote from Pat Mail. If you're looking up to leaders, remember that you're next. You are the next generation of leaders, and we are looking to you to help us figure out what else can we be doing in public health, what else can we be doing to make sure that we are getting to healthier generations instead of less healthy. So that wraps up my formal presentation. I don't know if we have the ability to collect questions from folks, or Cedric, I don't know if you have a particular formal presentation you want to make, but I'm happy to take questions or take emails from folks maybe who are watching this later in the day.
First, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. That was very informative. You know, a lot of the points you made hit home for me personally. You know, I went to you said you went to your first APHA in 1996, and it was in New York, and I'm assuming it was a large gathering just like it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to my first APHA in 2012 in San Francisco, and I was a master's student in my second year and worried about whether I'm going to go back to school, get a PhD, or go and get a job. And you know, the opportunity came to where I could work my college's booth and volunteer that way. And
Mm-hmm.
next thing I know, I'm meeting a former professor at my college who worked at University of Florida, and you know, one thing led to another. Now I'm here with it, you know, working on my PhD. The reason I'm bringing this up because I credit APHA for the opportunity for me to continue in graduate school, and um, and this is part of the reason why all the things you outlined about your personal experience and how you've done 16 years worth of continuous service, whether it's been APHA or GPHA or a combination of both, is part of the reason why I have decided, you know, I wanted to get more involved in APHA because, you know, obviously there's work involved, but there's so many more rewards that come back, whether it's networking, whether it's job opportunities, a hidden job market, that type of thing. And, you know, I love this organization. And, you know, kind of like you were saying, leadership begets leadership, and volunteerism begets leadership, and that type of thing. And, you know, people are saying, hey, you want to do this and that? Do you want to review articles? Do you want to, you know, be a part of this committee, so on and so forth. And it's true, you know, and because, you know, just putting a personal spin on it, you know, I'm living it. I lived it in the past, the present, and future, and so have you. And I think all the things that you said ring very true to APHA students. So, does anybody have any questions for Ms. Hinman while we're out? Any questions? I guess not right now. Thank you, Ms. Hinman. I appreciate your time. And we, you know, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and present with us.
It's my pleasure, and look for me at the APHA annual meeting. I'll be happy to talk to you and other students at any point. I'll be at some of those PHEHP business meetings, so.
Yeah, I'll be. Oh wait, I think we may have a question here.
Okay.
Oh no, it's just a comment. Thank you for putting this together. So we have a student that online that has enjoyed the chat. And yeah, I'll definitely see you at the business meetings, and I'm a proxy for the governing council meeting as well. So on Tuesday.
Good for you.
It's
a great place to get involved.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. I was on a webinar yesterday learning about the governing council, so you know, it's a huge responsibility voting on all the amendments and resolutions and all. So definitely excited, but you know, like you said before, APHA can be an intimidating experience at first. So starting off small, starting off in your section, starting off at your state local organization affiliate, you know, is a good way to do so. Or even going through your school and volunteering at a booth, to where you don't have to worry about approaching people. People are going to approach you. You know, so thank you again, Ms. Hinman, and we really appreciate on behalf of the EHP Student Engagement Work Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. And this concludes our first webinar. This webinar will be posted on YouTube, and we will send out a follow-up email to all APHA PHEHP students, so you can view this at your convenience. Thank you, Ms. Hemmon, and you all have a good afternoon and a good rest of the week.
Thank you.